worked around was fill the gap with trust. The idea being when there's a relational gap of conflict of some sort between you and another person, they did something that you didn't understand. Just, and they would talk about the obviously the tendency is to assume the worst and to assume the worst motives on the part of that person. Well, whenever there's a breach, whenever there's a gap, fill it with trust. And that became a way of proactively reminding yourself, I am simply going to assume everything that this person did was from the best motivations possible, or that it was a mistake. I'm going to take it upon myself to assume that automatically without them having to prove themselves to me or anything like that. But all of that whole explication of that idea was contained in that phrase, hey, fill the gap. Fill the gap with trust.
Okay, how you guys doing today? This is, again, the continuing saga of our story with our experience with ABWE. And I wanted to get back on so you can see my face as I tell this story. And I call this ABWE's bubble trouble. What ABWE does, if you can picture this as a bubble, picture the bubble, right? It's just a bubble. Inside the bubble's the information you need to know to make an informed decision. So we're going to bubbleize things to make it easier to process and understand. That's ABWE's process, okay? ABWE prefers small bubbles that are easier to explain, and they're less likely to be concerned with historical bubbles. So the first bubble that they deal with is from the event on March 8th all the way to the reporting and the first decision. The first bubble decision was, of course, that there was no child abuse. The skirmishes between the boys is not the main problem. It doesn't rise to the level of legal or practical. The main problem is me. That's the first decision in the bubble. Okay. The next bubble that pops up is they have also the bubble with the Lippy family, where they were sent home, as it says in the report, for an early departure, and they have that bubble and the decisions that were made around that bubble. Okay. The next bubble starts with Nancy Hepworth. They get the word that we're not happy. So the next bubble, Nancy Hepworth and Tim Hepworth come to us with open hands. They really do. They're in a new bubble, their own bubble. They don't know what's gone on before. They're just interested in getting facts. They really are a neutral party. Okay, that's the next bubble. That bubble goes from basically June 10th until September 2nd. On June 26th, they sit with us at our church and we tell them our story, our opinion, our view of the world. And at one point, we tell them about Phil McMillan's April 16th email letter that's sent to our pastor. This document tells the story of what Phil was thinking. And so Tim is interviewing, I believe it's me, and he says, well, Nance, don't you think we ought to get that? And she's like, yeah, I think we should look at everything for the 3 years before this incident, and even what's happened after. Okay, that is June 26th. That bubble, if you will, is the Hepworth investigation. That bubble kind of comes to an end on our second interview, September 2nd, where we give them even more information. And in that interview, I ask them, I say, did you interview our pastor? And they said no. And we probably won't unless someone with a higher pay grade tells us to. So that tells me that obviously someone's controlling the information now. Then they go on to say that our interactions with Phil are one thing, but I'm here to investigate child abuse. Now just hold the phone 1 minute. March 16th, Frank Weirman and Barney Robeson made a complaint to the Child Safety Department. The Child Safety Department met. They decided that it looked like it was an issue that Phil McMillan should handle. They sent Phil McMillan out to the field to handle whatever the situation was. He got there on the 23rd. He made his decision. He sent us home. He sent the Lippies home. And these are the decisions. June 26th, Tim and Nancy have open hands. On September 2nd, they're investigating child abuse without considering that decisions have already been made about child abuse. And then the fourth bubble is basically the world according to ABWE written down in the October 22nd report. That's the fourth bubble. The critical incident that triggered this entire thing took place on March 8th. Okay, this is our view of that incident, that bubbled incident that ABW wants to bubble up. Our view is not a self-contained incident. Our view is it's a critical incident. Our view is it's the end of the road of 2.5 years of abuse, okay? It is very personal to us. We think it's a big deal. We believe it's been abusive up to that point, and this is abusive as well. Our view is it's one child with one adult. Our view is the policies and laws and all those things are very important to follow. Our view is that our testimony, our experience, our history should tell you a story, okay? And we do agree. We're okay with it being an internal investigation. It doesn't have to be public. We're okay with private. Private. Everybody who should be in is in. Everybody who should be out is out. And private means everybody gets all the same information. Now, ABWE's view of this bubbled incident is that it's a self-contained incident. You can know everything you need to know in a 30-second window. It's a non-event. It's an accident. It's not personal. It's not a problem. It's not abuse. That's their view. They view it as two children not getting along. Age is subjective. They view the policies and laws as important as they interpret them to be. They view this, though, as ABW's responsibility to control, and they're much more interested in secrets because secrets and control allow them to guide the outcome where they need it to go. In the October 22nd report, they begin with the critical incident. That's the beginning of the report. If you begin with the critical incident, if you do your history, your case study on anything, and you start with the critical incident, you're going to have to ask a few questions like, why is this incident critical? What happened? What's going on? What's the history of this, right? We told a story of just 4 incidents that took place, okay? In those 4 incidents, each of those, ABWE treats those as a bubble as well. Okay, so each bubble, the first one we talk about, it's about 6 to 8 to 10 months, not even sure exactly when it took place because we weren't documenting anything. We thought we were living with people who would not bully us. And so our son and daughter are standing on the volleyball court. They are standing off to the right as you face the volleyball court. A volleyball court net, the net is 32 feet wide. The person, Caleb, who was kicking the ball, was back about 10 yards, maybe 15 yards. So it's like he's in a box, if you will. Our son and daughter standing over to the right, and somehow Caleb, right-handed kicker, kicks the ball to his right side. If you've ever played soccer, kicking a soccer ball, in general terms, if you're right-footed, you have a tendency to move it left than right. The ball hits my son in the face. My son reacts, punches him in the arm. ABWE in the bubble of that incident, they label my son the aggressor because he reacted and he struck Caleb. Okay, that's incident 1. Incident 2, my son reports that he did something that made Caleb angry on the soccer field and that Caleb kicked the soccer ball at him in his direction multiple times to try to hit him with it. He did not. And it was a bullying or an intimidation. That's how we would view it, how ABWE viewed it, as if you don't get hit, it's a non-incident. It's not intimidation, it's not bullying, it's just an event. It's bubbleized. The third event, and there's no aggressor there, no aggressor. The third event is our daughter gets hit in the face with a soccer ball inside the school building. They're all sitting in a room, and he's got a little soccer ball. It's small, and he hits my daughter in the face with it. She says, hey, don't do that. You don't have to do that. Don't do that. And he does it again. So she takes the soccer ball away from him, and she leaves and goes to her house. And she says, I'm not going to give it back to you unless you apologize. So he hems and haws. This is all testimony. All the things I'm telling you are testimony and documented. He hems and haws. He finally comes over. He apologizes in some form or fashion. She gives him the ball back. ABWE compartmentalizes that. Now, who got hit in the face with a soccer ball? It appeared to be intentional. There was no harm. There was no bloody. But there was also no aggressor. In that instance, in that bubble, an apology made all other behaviors null and void. And the fourth bubble that they start with is the critical incident. That's the fourth bubble. Now, ABW is really good at bubbleizing things as they go. And that's why I call this bubble trouble. because their bubbles don't connect each other. Their bubbles, they just float around. They're not anchored to any other bubble or any other part of a story or a fact. The fifth bubble that I want to talk about is my son is asked specifically, he says, Tim Hepworth says, so how many times did he do these corrective verbal things to you? And my son answers quickly, he says hundreds. ABWE takes that bubble and they take hundreds of possible scenarios and they put it in one bubble, and their explanation is, well, maybe you misunderstood. Maybe there's a lot that goes into communication. Maybe the words you didn't understand correctly. Maybe what he meant isn't what was bad. Maybe your perceptions are off. Maybe. That's their explanation of hundreds of times. Because what do you do with that? So then ABWE, their definition of bullying has to be physical. It has to cause damage. And it has to be, in their view, in their bubble, it has to fit their definition. The world outside of ABWE is not nearly as important or perceptive as the one inside of it. So what do they do with these 4 incidents? They say 4 incidents over 30 months does not create a pattern of bullying. So the preponderance of evidence, there is no bullying. What do they do with the hundreds of times both my daughter and my son testified to things that he had done? This is what they do. They don't include the hundreds as a pattern of nothing. Hundreds is not a pattern. 4 is not a pattern. I don't even think they know what the word pattern means. ABWE has bubble trouble, okay? Phil McMillan came out and his bubble made decisions about our bubble and about the Lippy's bubble. And then Nancy comes and she starts interviewing in her bubble. And then it gets back to ABWE and they have their bubble. Then you get to the October 22nd report and they have bubbles within the bubble. Okay? And everything is bubbleized in such a way that it's disjointed and not connected. They're not historians and they're not investigators. That's not what they're doing here. That's not what they're trying to accomplish. They're trying to get done with the bubble trouble. In the report, at the end of this, I'm going to read it to you, but at the end of this altercation, they come up with their conclusion. And their conclusion is simply, ABWE does not have a policy to cover physical abuse in a situation in which the aggressor is a minor and the target is an adult. I've already talked about this from a different perspective, but this is their conclusion, okay? So here you have ABWE is writing their report. Obviously, they've come up with their conclusion before they wrote their report, right? So they can write their report and they can say that the aggressor is a minor and the target is an adult. They have come to that conclusion and they write it in the report. So from the October 22nd report, this is the bubble we're talking about. Okay, what's inside this bubble for ABWE? Okay, there are 6 people inside this bubble. 6 people, okay? There are 4 Lippies, 1 Byram, and 1 Weirman, okay? Weirman is the neutral adult, if you will. He sees the events. He reports the events. He's on record as reporting the events. My son's 14. He's there. Our family, me and my wife, are in our house waiting for lunch. My daughter's in our house. The 2 Lippy parents are in the community building fixing lunch for their family. There's 4 people left. 3 Lippy children, 13-year-old boy, 14-year-old girl, 16-year-old boy, 18-year-old Caleb. That's the people in the bubble. Those are the only people that should be considered, thought about from ABWE's perspective. On March 23rd, 2 weeks after the incident, we interview with Phil McMillan, and I tell them that the kids have been playing football several times a week for about 6 weeks. That part doesn't make the report. I also say that Caleb joined on and off as all-time quarterback. That doesn't make the report. Nancy Hepworth asked my daughter, or Tim Hepworth asked my daughter, he says, so the 14-year-old child said Caleb was supposed to be all-time quarterback. And she says, all-time quarterback. And he ends up actually being a receiver instead. Is that right? I just want to get that out there. So you've got to have a little bit of history to understand life. So these kids have been playing for about 6 weeks. Let's just say, argument's sake, they played 30 minutes 6 times. Let's just say they've played a total of football of 3 hours, okay, with 5 people. 4 or 5, right? 5 people out there playing football. And in those 3 hours, no one else has had a stiff arming issue. No one else has had a reaction. That is part of the reality of what's gone on. Then you have to realize that these children are between the ages of 18 and 13. They play sports all the time. What do you think the odds are that there were some understood rules and unwritten rules? Of course, one of the rules that almost everybody has is let's not try to hurt each other. Unless you're in the ABWE bubble. If you're in the ABWE bubble, stiff arms, well, it just happens. You have to realize that the story is mostly being told from the victim's perspective. The victim is the adult, and the perpetrator is the child. And the story is told, of course, from the victim's perspective. It reads this way. 1, Caleb, this is Caleb talking, we were playing, and I didn't realize any tensions or anything like that. So you're asking him to give the story, and you would think a follow-up question would be, well, were there usually tensions? From this report, it says Keith and Michelle Lippy first heard the allegations of bullying at the mediation meeting on March 12th. There have been many conversations between the Byrons and Lippys about the concerns for the interactions between the 14-year-old and Caleb. In this report, they say, yes, indeed, there have been tensions. When Caleb kicked the soccer ball and hit my son in the face with it, there was an observer, and that observer is quoted as saying, the kids, everyone seems to be getting along just fine. I didn't see any bad sportsmanship or any kind of ridicule or anything like that. Now, who describes what they've never seen before? So obviously they've seen it before. With this group of people, it appears that they describe this using 2 words, sportsmanship and ridicule. Obviously, they have seen it before. Or you wouldn't use it to express what you're not seeing now. 2. One of the kids, I can't remember who it was, threw me a pass and I caught it. And the 14-year-old child was there waiting for me. And I kind of was surprised because he was coming at me really fast. So I had the football in my hand and I put it out, as a reaction. Then you have to ask yourself about concepts like, is this a cheap shot? Is it even possible? What would be a cheap shot? A deliberate act of roughness? Something that was done to a vulnerable person? You ever think about that? What about the rules of two-hand touch football? Does two-hand touch football generally include stiff arms? Not generally. It hasn't for 6 weeks. It hasn't with all the other players. It just hasn't been there, but it's there today. So Tim Hepworth is interviewing my son. He says, you were hit in the face? When it hit my face, it hurt, and that triggered my reaction. It took you by surprise. Have these kind of interactions happened before in football games? No, they haven't. My son says no. But ABWE injects a little bit of their own opinion here. And here's what they say. They are quoting one of the Lippy children. It says, you're just playing and this is going to happen. That's their quote. And they slap on the end of that quote, and it was something that was part of the game. March 23rd, Phil McMillan told us that a stiff arm is a common play in two-hand touch football. Now, but I'm not saying that as a defense for Caleb. 6 weeks, 5 players, potentially 6 to 8 games, let's just say 3 hours. Nobody else had, as a reaction. 6 on this list, and it hit him in the face. Also in the writing it says, 14-year-old child's face connected with the ball. And then Caleb says, I think he thought it was on purpose. A very easy follow-up question would be, why would he think it's on purpose? But that question isn't really important when you're in the bubble. It hit him in the face. So the football is in his hand, right? His arm is extended out, connected to his body and his brain. And it hit him in the face. Now, let me just ask you, in all honesty, If he was wearing a glove on his hand, would we say the glove hit him in the face? Just because the ball is between the hand and the head doesn't mean the ball is not completely in Caleb Lippy's control. Did you know that the shoulder is the most versatile joint in the body? You can go 2 feet over your head, 2 feet down, 2 feet out, 2 feet back, 2 feet in the front. You've got so much versatility with that arm. It's amazing the things you can do with a shoulder attached to an arm. Conversely, your face is connected to your head, connected to your shoulders. Not a versatile joint. But ABW is content within the bubble to make a descriptor like the child's face acted on the ball. Where's the ball? It's in the hand of Caleb Lippy, attached to his arm, attached to his shoulder, attached to his head. You know, as a reaction.
If I was upset about it, it would be played off as though I was the problem. So his actions aren't the problem. What he does isn't the problem. See, there would be no problem. This is his logic, and this is the narcissist's logic. There would be no problem if you didn't get upset by what he did. Basically, it's like saying this. I punched you in the face. Everything's fine. There's only going to be a problem if you get upset that I punched you in the face. Therefore, what the logical conclusion is, and the argument that these people are trying to make within the context of their relationships is they can do whatever they want, whenever they want. And there's no problem. As long as you don't get upset about it. And if you do get upset about it, their actions aren't the problem. The problem is that you got upset about it. It's a very pathological, obviously narcissistic and selfish, self-centered way of thinking about things.
Inside the bubble are people. 6 people. Inside the people are brains. Inside the brains are memories. Inside those memories are interpretations. So if you're 14 years old, you've been hit in the face before. Your sister's been hit in the face before. He's kicked soccer balls at you. He's done hundreds of corrective actions. When you take a stiff arm in the face, in ABW's bubble, you should know it's an accident. Because ABWE isn't interested in anything outside the bubble. So now I want to stop there and I want to let you understand that ABWE now micros the bubble. So the 30-second bubble they're talking about, they're going to shrink that bubble down even to a smaller bubble. And that smaller bubble took place and is ended already. It took place. The actions, if you read this, the actions is the child running fast. And the reaction is the adult somehow being startled, scared, reactionary, as a reaction. The oldest, most coordinated, is the only person who has this kind of a reaction in a two-hand touch football game. He's 6'4". He's 18 years old. He's a junior in high school. He's bigger than everyone else. And he has a reaction. That is microbubble 1. The action was caused by the child's running. And the reaction was a justifiable behavior that just, sometimes happens. It's part of the game. So 7. So he kind of got mad and started hitting me and saying things. 8. 14-year-old child started hitting on Caleb, possibly for 30 seconds. At first, Caleb just stood there. Okay? And then, after receiving a number of hits, Caleb responded with a swing or two. Okay, so the story is basically Caleb, the kid gets mad, he starts hitting on Caleb possibly for 30 seconds. Now let's talk about the bubble again, okay? Inside that bubble are his 3 siblings and Frank Weirman, okay? 30 seconds. Have you ever seen anybody take a beating for 30 seconds? 30 seconds would be a beating. Okay? You can land at least 1 punch a second. if not faster than that if you're using both hands. So we're supposed to believe that ABWE has cerebrally, is that a word? Has a cerebral approach to this, and that 30 seconds seems reasonable, right? And so then we're supposed to believe that the 3 siblings of Caleb Lippy stood there and watched on a football field that's probably about 20 yards by 40 yards. That somehow they stood there and watched this altercation just go down, right? We're supposed to believe that Frank Weirman, a medical doctor, is watching there in the shade going, I could get involved, but it could get sweaty. That's what we're just supposed to buy, hook, line, and sinker, that this is an accurate depiction of the facts. So it goes on to say, after receiving a number of hits, Caleb responded with a swing or two. Neither Caleb, the 14-year-old, or observers were sure if it connected or not, which implies that either Caleb's swings at the 14-year-old did not connect or they were weak. Caleb's response was to stop the 14-year-old child from hitting on him. Line 17, 14-year-old child got mad, said to Caleb, "Go to hell," and left. Caleb's right side and back were red, and he developed bruises. The 14-year-old child did not have any injuries. Frank Weirman observed part of the incident. He watched the children play, did not observe Caleb's straight arm Ethan, but he did observe Ethan hitting Caleb. 21, ABWE does not have a policy to cover child abuse, physical abuse, in a situation in which the aggressor is a minor and the target is an adult. That's the lay of the land. The bubble view is that he stood there, he took the punches, and then he took some punches. They're not sure if they landed or not, and the only reason he took punches was to stop the 14-year-old from hitting him. He is entitled to self-defense here. He's an 18-year-old victim entitled to self-defense. That's the story. Back in a different bubble, when Phil McMillan was interviewing us in a different bubble that doesn't exist in this bubble, it's a different bubble. In that bubble, my 14-year-old child says that he hit Caleb about 6 times. This bubble says the fight lasted 30 seconds. This bubble leaves out a few things that the other bubble didn't. In this bubble, in March 23rd, talking to Phil McMillan, our son says 13-year-old Lippy intervened to try to stop things. At that point, Caleb threw a few punches, and he didn't believe that they landed. He didn't think they hit him. That's 2 weeks after the incident. Now in the June 26th open-minded Nancy Hepworth and Tim Hepworth events, they're talking to our son. He's giving them the story, and he says, after the 13-year-old Lippy came to get between me and Caleb tried to swing at me, and I stepped back and told him to go to hell. That's the story on June 26th. So 2 weeks after the events, 4 months after the events, the story's the same. And here's the timeline. 14-year-old's hitting Caleb. Caleb's brother steps in between and stops the fight. That's the distance. There's someone in between. That's the distance. So hitting, intervention, and then Caleb tries to hit my son. ABWE omits part of a single sentence to make sure within their bubble on October 22nd that self-defense is a valid event to stop someone from hitting on you. ABWE takes this sentence and they just leave out everything but the thing that they want in there. They leave out the after the 13-year-old Lippy came to get between me and Caleb tried to hit me, and I stepped back. They leave that part out. You know what's important for this story? That is told. My son says on September 23rd, he said, "I'm going to break your face," and he said, "Go to hell." He said that 2 weeks after, on March 23rd. Here we are, June 26th, in a different bubble, same testimony. But in October, in a new bubble, this testimony doesn't work. It doesn't exist. It's not even there. One big problem. It exists, and they know it does. So second micro bubble, ABWE, in their world, where stiff arms and two-hand touch footballs are so common that they haven't happened in 6 weeks with anybody else, but they're accidental here. They cannot be anything else. ABWE has a second bubble, and this is how they view it. Micro bubble 2 isn't connected to micro bubble 1, and they view it this way, okay? Listen to what is said. So he kind of got mad and started hitting me. The 14-year-old child started hitting on Caleb, possibly for 30 seconds. Caleb at first just stood there. And after receiving a number of hits, as recorded 6 or up to 30 seconds, Caleb's responded with a swing or two. After receiving a number of hits, Caleb responded with a swing or two. Neither Caleb, the 14-year-old child, nor observers. So who are the observers? Frank Weirman is an observer. Frank Weirman told all of us on March 12th that Caleb hit him at least twice. But here, he's just an observer. His name isn't mentioned here. He's an observer. We're sure if it connected or not, which implies that either Caleb's swings at the 14-year-old child did not connect or they were weak. I don't even know why that's there, but it's there. Caleb's response was to stop the 14-year-old child from hitting on him. Caleb reported he was hitting as hard as he could. Caleb reported he said, "Go to hell." Actually, my son reported that. Okay. Caleb developed bruises. The child did not have any bruises. Now, Frank Weirman's name gets brought back in. As an observer, he didn't observe the stiff arm, but he did observe the 14-year-old hitting Caleb. Microbubble 2 and microbubble 1 are not connected. So microbubble 2, the child lashes out for no explainable reason.
March 11, 2016 PII report. This was written 4 months after this report we're talking about was written. There exists a prevailing attitude towards authority in evangelical circles, primarily that there was a spirituality standard that required unquestioning compliance with authority. This attitude prevented the development of healthy systems of checks and balances and openness to corrective actions. Critical thinking skills were suspended.
At ABWE, they can't marry up 1 second to the next, as if somehow the child should know. What is wrong with this child that he would lash out? And of course, he's the perpetrator, attacking, targeting is the word they use, targeting this defenseless, poor, rude, this 18-year-old. And he's the victim of child abuse. He's the victim of child abuse, as told by ABWE in this bubble on October 22nd, 6 months after they've bubbleized everything else. So at the end of this bubble, ABWE says that they're going to hold this to the standard of preponderance of the evidence.
This preponderance is based on the more convincing evidence and its probable truth or accuracy, and not on the amount of evidence. Thus, one clearly knowledgeable witness may provide a preponderance of evidence over a dozen witnesses with hazy testimony, or a signed agreement with definite terms may outweigh opinions or speculation about what the parties intended.
And their preponderance of the evidence is this. This was an accident. It can't be anything else. You know why? Because the 3 Lippy children say it's an accident. They're his siblings. He says it's an accident. And the only person who says it's on purpose is the child who got hit in the face and his parents who weren't there. So under preponderance of the evidence, these four people, no matter if they say the moon is made of cheese, pink donkeys fly, the one child against the four, preponderance of the evidence means that they're right. You're not allowed to look outside the bubble because that doesn't work. ABWE actually within the bubble decides that some of the child's testimony isn't valid, but all of the victim's testimony is. Preponderance of the evidence in the bubble was on accident, so it can't be abuse. And then secondly, there was an apology. We say there was an apology, but they say there was an apology. But they don't tell us what the apology words were. Their second argument is because I said there was no apology, kind of tells me that he wasn't sorry or it might have been on purpose. They say, well, there was an apology. They claim that there was an apology because 4 days after the incident, the 6 Lippies said there was an apology and the 4 Byrams said there wasn't. So under the preponderance of the evidence, there was an apology. So there is no bullying, there is no abuse. That is their use of preponderance of the evidence. The 6 Lippies could not lose because they have more of the same opinion.
Just assume that what you know from your initial contact is always the whole story. It's probably the whole story as they see it, but there's also other perspectives that I think would be wise to be taken into account.
What does the book of Proverbs say, right? That, one person sounds right until the next one states their case. Yeah. And you have in the Old Testament as a principle of the law, and Paul applies it to elders in the New Testament, don't accept any testimony apart from 2 or 3 witnesses, 2 or 3 independent lines of evidence.
So in a different bubble on June 26th, when Tim and Nancy Hepworth are open to facts, they ask our son some questions. And our son says, in the meeting, the one on March 12th, 4 days after the incident, towards the end, Caleb told an outright lie. I would never hurt Ethan. I love Ethan. I love the whole Byram family. Over the 3 years we were there, his actions towards me and Natalie were not love. In a different bubble, on September 2nd, when Nancy's no longer interested in what Philip Miller may or may not have done, my wife says, secrets are not the answer. And I say, secrets don't protect the innocent. They only protect the guilty. In a different bubble, Phil claims that he interviewed all of us for 10 hours as his total interviews. And I say his interview with our son was 10 minutes. He calls it a skirmish. He doesn't call it a fight. Doesn't call it assault. He says, this is not singling you out. But he sent us home. And when he sent us home for counseling and he gave the Lippies a medical leave, that's singling us out. When we're on a phone call with Ron Washer, who gave the medical leave to the Lippies, this is my wife. She says, and even when we talked to Ron, he said, when you guys pushed the button on legal, and we're like, Nancy, let me say, you didn't push the button on legal. What happened was that Barney and Frank were the ones who reported it. And I think that sort of got us off on the wrong foot. It is something I would have expected the parents to do rather than Frank and Barney. But Barney and Frank were sort of impartial people. That Frank had seen part of the incident, and I think that's why Frank and Barney reported it. So ABWE wants this bubble to be a very nondescript, simple, easy to understand first incident. The first thing we look at is the critical incident. This is just a snapshot in time. It's an accident. But when push comes to shove, when truth is going to inflict damage on them, they have to resort to the standard play. They have to tell lies, and they tell lies of omission. So let's get outside of ABW's bubble into the real world. In the real world, this is basically kids are playing football, and this is a stiff arm in the face. It is the start of the action. My son is playing. He's doing nothing out of the ordinary. Caleb Lippy stiff arms him in the face. Under the preponderance of the evidence, it's more likely than not done on purpose, since he does not have spastic arm disease, and there was only 5 people playing, and this was light recreation. His chances of doing that on accident under the preponderance of the evidence is very slim. But you go on to the history of all the things that have gone on. The action was Caleb Lippy stiff-arming my son in the face. His reaction was to hit Caleb, and Caleb's reaction was to hit him back.
You might love an individual very much, but don't take just their word for it. Be very slow to bring accusation against other believers who are in ministry and who are just trying to figure it out just along with the rest of us.
And ABWE just slices off truth as they see fit.
Some of the best changes that we've seen have come because of a pastor getting involved in the situation, patiently working through that, and holding the missionary and the mission into account in some ways, and watching that, entering into the long process of seeing that, because bringing some perspective to the table. And I appreciate that. I've had many conversations with pastors that have gotten involved in a situation and been such a blessing.
To make sure their narrative in their October 22nd bubble protects all the other bubbles. They want to protect the bubble of sending the Byrams home for counseling. And they want to protect the bubble of giving the Lippies a medical leave. And they want to protect the bubble of us reporting workplace retaliation against Phil McMillan. And they want to protect the bubble of the retaliation that each one of them did.
This is the way I think an organization like ABWE can work really effectively well with the local church.
This is criminaldefenselawyer.com. Generally, people cannot claim self-defense when they are the ones who instigated the fight, although there are some exceptions. The most important evidence to present in support of self-defense claims is evidence that shows that the defendant did not start the fight. And this is also from NWI Times. Police say most people know it's illegal to batter somebody, but not everyone is aware that it's also illegal to taunt, challenge, or otherwise provoke someone into fighting.
Around was fill the gap with trust.
What was the result when we filled the gap with trust? March 11, 2016 PII report. ABWE has for decades, up to and including during this investigation, created a culture of obfuscation and deceit when it served the purpose of protecting an individual or the organization. The courage to fully embrace the truth has rarely been demonstrated. On June 10, 2015, we challenged Phil McMillan and Ron Washer's authority, and the October 22, 2015 report was the result of our challenge. March 11, 2016, PII, page 203. For the ABWE organization as a whole, the order to not discuss also meant that the actions of those in authority could not be discussed, questioned, supported, or challenged. October 22, 2015 report. Summary of ABWE Child Protection Policy defines child physical abuse as any act that results in a non-accidental physical injury. The writer misquoted ABWE policy. Actual policy reads, physical abuse may be defined as any act that results in a non-accidental physical injury. The use of the word may be is expressing possibility versus the word must, which would express necessity. ABWE then changes the standard, saying this requires that there be some physical evidence of being hit. ABWE neglects Note 10, including inappropriate physical or emotional behavior, putting children at risk.